Major breaking news. Attorney General Pam Bondi and President Donald Trump have just announced that the United States Department of Justice has launched an investigation into the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department to determine whether or not they are engaging in a pattern and practice of depriving ordinary Americans of their right to keep and bear arms, specifically by delaying and slow walking and failing to issue concealed carry permits. This is a big deal. This is a concept that we've talked about on this channel for literally over 2 years, the notion of institutional reform litigation. I'm proud to say and happy to say that just maybe, it's all going to bear fruit right now. Let's talk about it. Hey folks, I'm Mark Smith, host of the Four Boxes Diner, proud American gun owner, constitutional attorney, member of the United States Supreme Court Bar. I'm proud to say the top voice of the Second Amendment at the 2025 Gundies Awards. Thank you for your support. Famous economist John Maynard Keynes, who I studied when I was trained to be an economist before law school, once had a famous quote that went along these lines. Practical men who believe themselves to be quite exempt from any intellectual influence are usually the slaves of some defunct economist. Madmen in authority who hear voices in the air are distilling their frenzy from some academic scribbler of a few years back. Now, the point of that quote from economist John Maynard Keynes was simply to say that a lot of times politicians and political officials in the modern era are often gleaning and grabbing ideas from the past, as well they should. And that's very important because one of the things we've talked about on this channel for at least 2 years, since January 2023 by my review, is the notion of applying institutional reform litigation strategies to advance the right to keep and bear arms. Specifically, the deployment of the Department of Justice, the Office of Civil Rights, to laser focus on those law enforcement agencies in the deep blue anti-gun states of New York, New Jersey, Massachusetts, Hawaii, California. You know the team. You know that Illinois. And to actually bring the power of the federal government down on top of their heads, to bring them in line, to make them respect the Second Amendment rights of their citizens. Something that has never been done before. Well, I'm happy to report that Attorney General Pam Bondi and President Donald Trump have just announced that that is exactly what they are now starting to do with an announcement that they just made entitled Protecting the Second Amendment Rights of Ordinary Law-Abiding Americans, and how that's a high priority of the Trump administration. Specifically, the Trump administration announced that they are going to engage in a broad review of restrictive firearms-related laws in places like California and other states, and that the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division just announced, literally now, an investigation into the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department to determine whether it's engaging in violations of Second Amendment rights of its citizens. In fact, the press release issued by the Department of Justice under Attorney General Pam Bondi specifically refers to a recent federal court decision that found that the law and facts were clearly in favor of two private plaintiffs who had challenged the lengthy, listen to this folks, the lengthy 18-month delays that the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department had imposed when processing their concealed carry licensing permits. Now here's the thing. We've talked about this before. There is a notion in law that the left in America have deployed robustly for the last many decades. That is the notion of institutional reform litigation, where you bring a lawsuit or an investigation against a particular institution. Often it's a school district, often it's a prison, something like that, claiming, for example, they are violating the Eighth Amendment, cruel and unusual punishment clause in the context of prisons. Maybe in the context of schools, they're engaging in the act of racial segregation, and you want the school to be desegregated and not engage in racial discrimination. So there's investigations launched by the United States Department of Justice to try to stop this practice. This has been done over and over and over again, and many times it leads to a court taken over as a monitor in some ways of these institutions. And again, If you want to Google this, you can look up institutional reform litigation or check out the videos I linked to down below of my prior videos, which sometimes I know you all ask, like, Mark, why do I need to learn this? Is this on the test when I watch the Four Boxes Diner? No, it's not always on the official test, but it's always on the test of life. And that's why I'll put a link to 2 videos I did before. One I released in January 29th of 2023, that's right, and another in October 26th of 2024, talking in detail about how the Department of Justice, in the hands of a pro-Second Amendment president, which Donald Trump undeniably is, the best Second Amendment president ever in American history. I stand by that statement. People thought that was hyperbole. It's not hyperbole. I will defend that every time, because nobody has faced the anti-gun resources at this level, unlike President Trump. Others have faced anti-gunners, but not to the degree that President Trump has. So anyway, Donald Trump and Pam Bondi have continued to impress when it comes to the Second Amendment, and we're only less than 2 months into this administration. There's a lot more to come because, as you know, it's very difficult to advance the ball in the Department of Justice when you are incomplete when it comes to personnel. We still don't have the Solicitor General's John Sauer confirmed by the U.S. Senate. We still don't have the head of the Office of Civil Rights, Harmeet Dillon, confirmed by the U.S. Senate. So the Department of Justice to this very moment is still operating not at full capacity, which is terrible. I hope the Republicans in the U.S. Senate get cracking and get the DOJ people confirmed, because the Trump administration needs as many people as possible on their team to fight back against not just the anti-gunners, but these anti-Trumpers that are bringing all these lawsuits on behalf of illegal aliens and green card holders that should be deported and so on and so on. So basically, the White House counsel's office and the Department of Justice, I'm sure, are drinking from a fire hose, trying to get all this work done. So it is exciting to see that this announcement of investigation into the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department, and beyond that, they specifically say that they're going to start looking at other parts of California as well as other states, all consistent with the sorts of things we've talked about that I've educated you on in the Second Amendment community, how we in charge of the Department of Justice can do what we need to do to protect the fundamental right to keep and bear arms. The Supreme Court in the McDonald case in 2010, for example, literally called the right to keep and bear arms fundamental no fewer than something like 13 times in a single Supreme Court decision. That was the McDonald. And of course, Bruin reiterated those concepts as well. And in light of that, it's worth going back to the press release by Pam Bondi, the Attorney General of the United States. Here's what she writes in terms of going after these terrible anti-gun police departments, sheriff's departments, and others that don't respect our right to keep and bear arms. This is what she writes. The Supreme Court has repeatedly recognized that the Second Amendment is not a second-class right. And over the past 2 decades, the Supreme Court has recognized that the Second Amendment is a fundamental individual constitutional right and has taken multiple opportunities to strengthen Second Amendment protections for ordinary law-abiding citizens. However, some states and localities have resisted this recent pro-Second Amendment case law, and California has been a particularly egregious offender. In response to recent Supreme Court case law, California enacted new legislation to further restrict the ability of ordinary law-abiding Californians to keep and bear arms. And many California localities appear to be imposing additional burdens beyond those required by California state law, including by subjecting ordinary, law-abiding Californians to expensive fees and lengthy wait times associated with applications for concealed carry handgun licenses. Now, just to step back, big picture constitutional-wise, in Disarmed versus Bruin, you know the whole standard, but here's what I want you to focus on. There is a reference there to shall issue permanent regimes. Now, what's crystal clear by the Supreme Court is this. They have said that even if you assume for the sake of argument that shall issue permanent regimes are constitutional, which they assume for the sake of argument they are for the moment, okay, we don't need to get into that debate. It's unnecessary here. The Supreme Court said unequivocally that to the extent that a licensing process takes too long, meaning it takes too many days, too many weeks, whatever you want to say, it takes too long to get the license, or it's too expensive, then that is unconstitutional. And that is what John Roberts, Chief Justice John Roberts, and Justice Brett Kavanaugh and the rest of the court basically have indicated. And certainly if something takes months to get a concealed carry permit, that's clearly unconstitutional. For example, this is what I might recommend to the Department of Justice if I were advising them, which I'm not, but if I were, here's what I might say to them. I might ask them to go to the time it takes to get a voter ID, to get a driver's license, to get a welfare card, to get a social security number, whatever it is, in those same states that you're looking at. Because if it turns out that, let's say, for example, hypothetically, in California, it takes 18 months to get a concealed carry permit from the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department, but it takes 3 hours to get a voter ID card. It takes 2 hours to register to vote. Whatever it is. You see what I'm saying? It takes a day to get a driver's license. I don't know what the numbers are, but you get the point. If you can show that California, or maybe New Jersey, New York, Massachusetts, whatever, if you can show that you can get these other government-issued IDs in a matter of hours or days, if you will, and yet it takes months and months and months to get a concealed carry permit, I think you have a very powerful case that there's a violation of the Second Amendment here. So that's how I would approach this case if I were investigating these anti-gun jurisdictions, and if I were litigating against these anti-gun jurisdictions, I would draw comparisons between the time it takes to get other government-issued IDs on the one hand versus the time and the expense associated with getting a concealed carry permit. And I have very little doubt when you're dealing with these anti-gun jurisdictions that the amount of time it takes to be able to register to vote, or even to vote on election day, is dramatically shorter in terms of time and money than it is to get a concealed carry permit. And I would hoist them on their own petard and show that data and compare and contrast that data to win the case for the Second Amendment. Again, that's how I would fight this if I were a lawyer looking at these jurisdictions to demonstrate they are clearly violating the Second Amendment. That's my approach. I would do a compare and contrast. You might even look at things like parade permits, where or a park permit. If you want to hold a protest in the park and there's only one person there, one group at a time that can use the park because there's only one park, or one Fifth Avenue in New York City, whatever it is, what is the time it takes to get a parade permit, a protest permit, whatever you want to call it, and compare that again with the time and expense associated with a concealed carry permit for a single person. And I'm pretty confident in these anti-gun jurisdictions, the Second Amendment argument will be quite compelling. But let's go on. Let's see what else Pam Bondi said in this press release, a powerful statement by the Department of Justice, and I think it's a sign of many more good things to come for our Second Amendment rights. Here's what she writes. This Department of Justice will not stand idly by while states and localities infringe on the Second Amendment rights of ordinary law-abiding Americans, said Attorney General Pamela Bondi. The Second Amendment is not a second-class right, and under my watch, the department will actively enforce the Second Amendment just like it actively enforces other fundamental constitutional rights. Powerful stuff, exactly right. But then she goes on and indicates that the right answer here is for these states and localities to voluntarily do the right thing and comply with the law so they don't get spanked, right? So here's what she says in the rest of her press release. Attorney General Bondi hopes that states and localities will voluntarily embrace their duty to protect the Second Amendment rights of their citizens. But if necessary, today's announcement will be the first of many similar investigations, lawsuits, or other actions involving other localities in California, the state of California itself, and any other states or localities that insist on unduly burdening or effectively denying the Second Amendment rights of their ordinary law-abiding citizens. This is fantastic news, folks, because this is a sign that the multi-billion dollar budget of the Department of Justice is now poised to come down on the head of those in America that violate our Second Amendment rights like a ton of bricks. Powerful stuff by Attorney General Pam Bondi and President Donald Trump. So again, this is the beginning. This is the beginning of the story. I think there's a lot more great stuff coming down the pike. There's a lot of good stuff that's already occurred. And I think there's a lot more stuff that we will be cheering for and seeing down the pike. I have very good feelings about Attorney General Pam Bondi and President Donald Trump. And as I've said before, even in his first term, Donald Trump was the best Second Amendment president ever in light of what he did with the Supreme Court alone. So with that said, again, the history of the future is yet to be written, but this is very good news, and I'm happy to report that sometimes when I do videos that you all roll your eyes about, like, why do we have to learn this, Mark? Is this going to be on my test or not? Yes, indeed. What I go through on the Four Boxes Diner does often become reality, and it's important that you learn your lessons here at the Four Boxes Diner because, yes, indeed, many of those lessons will come back and bear fruit down the road, even if perhaps it's not obvious at the time I shoot and release the videos, like my January 2023 video and the October 2024 video. But again, if you follow the Four Boxes Diner, you're usually going to be ahead of the game when it comes to our right to keep and bear arms. And that's how I like it, because I want you to be the smartest person in the room in whatever room you're in when it comes to our right to keep and bear arms and our constitutional rights in total. So there you have it, folks. Hope you learned something here today at the 4 Boxes Diner. Make sure you subscribe at X at 4 Boxes Diner. Don't forget to follow me on YouTube and on Rumble. And I look forward to talking to you again real soon here at the 4 Boxes Diner.
Orders up. Table 2A.